you tonight, I invite you to open them to 1 Samuel 18. On Sunday night, we're in a sermon series entitled The Life and Times of David. And as we go through this, you're going to get a seminary education on the life and times of David, as the sermon series says. You're going to get to know why he was a man after God's own heart. You're going to get to know his mountaintop experiences, his valley experiences, the things that he blessed, the things that he cursed. You're going to get to know a lot about him, and in knowing a lot about him, we're going to know a lot about ourselves. Because the Bible doesn't tell us these stories about David just to tell us about David. They tell these stories to tell us about ourselves. So this is not just about the past, it's about the present. Not just about David, but about you and I here tonight. And tonight's message is entitled, A Monster Falls. The last time we met, a giant falls. Tonight, a monster falls. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 6 through 9. Now it had happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine named Goliath, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. And the women had a chorus that they sang and danced to. It said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry. Now the Bible wants us to see he wasn't just angry. He was exceeding angry. He was very angry. He was much angry. And the saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've only ascribed thousands. Now what more can David have but the kingdom itself? Verse 9. So King Saul eyed David, gave him the eye of suspicion, the eye of hatred, the eye of murder. From that day forward, a monster falls. As we begin our story tonight, David has defeated Goliath. The giant is dead. His head belongs to Israel, and his body belongs to the wild dogs and to the buzzards to consume. As David is returning from this dramatic victory, it was a dramatic victory. The people of Israel are excited. They're excited because of what David has done through the power of God Himself. And the women of Israel are in celebration of what has taken place. They're singing, they're dancing. As King Saul and his group, with David included, are coming through them, walking through their midst. And they have a little chorus that they're singing. It had music to it. It had rhythm to it. It had a melody to it. They're singing a top 40 hit. Saul has slain his thousands. But David, our hero, our man, our future, he has slain his 10,000s. Can you imagine hearing that chorus once, twice, 3 times, 6 times, 9 times, 25 times, 40 times? As you go from the great battle back to the capital city of Israel? Can you imagine King Saul, his agitation? his frustration, his aggravation. Can you imagine his anger as he listens to his people politely applaud him? Because he has slain thousands. And wildly cheer David, because he has slain tens of thousands. And the more this ballad, this chorus is sang, and the celebration of the people occurs, Saul becomes angry. Hateful angry. Hostile angry. An angry that is deep and dark and demonic. And this anger that he has a name. It's called envy. Envy. Envious anger. Now, let me say a word about envy, because some of you might be asking the question, what's the difference in envy and jealousy? Very little. They're Siamese twins, or the flip side of the same coin. But jealousy generally is fueled by fear. Fear makes jealousy. But anger makes envy. So really both of them are the same. They just come from different sources of sin. And King Saul is angry, and his anger is fueled by envy. Shakespeare called envy a green-eyed monster that lives within. Dryden called envy a sickening of the soul. The writer of Proverbs calls envy an anger that rots the bones. And Saul is angry at David. What has David done? Nothing. He went out and he battled Goliath for the glory of his God, for the glory of the nation, for the glory of the king, not for his own glory. He defeated Goliath, but David never asked for any credit. He didn't ever ask for any applause. He didn't ask for any accolades. He didn't ask for any awards. He was just doing what he believed God wanted him to do in service to the very king that now hates him, has an envious anger toward him. And King Saul, as I said, he's suspicious of David. That suspicion turns to hatred. That hatred turns to hostility. And as we're going to see, that hostility is going to turn to murder. Jesus said if you hate somebody in your mind or in your heart, you've already done what to them? You have murdered them. And King Saul is filled with hatred. He's filled with hostility. Envy has caused him to have an explosive anger. And it's all directed against David. King Saul wants to kill David. Anger that is not dealt with in the early stages will turn to murder in the latter stages. In 1 Samuel 18, if you got your Bibles open, in verses 10 and 11, we see the first of 5 times that Saul tries to kill David. King Saul wants to kill David. Verse 10 and 11 of 1 Samuel 18. Saul throws a spear at David. David is playing music for King Saul. He's the king's musician. And as David is playing that music that calms King Saul in his envious anger, Saul throws a spear at David. Just misses him. If it would have hit him, it would have killed him. Saul wasn't throwing at the wall. He was throwing at David's brains. And he missed. But Saul tried to kill David with a spear. In verse 12 through 30 of 1 Samuel 18, you'll find that Saul wants to murder David, but he wants to do it indirectly, discreetly, if you will. So Saul makes David a commander of one of the armies of Israel. David, come here, son. You've got a lot of potential. I saw what you did to Goliath. I want to make you a military commander over one of my armies. I want you to lead this army. I want you to lead this army, David, into battle. I've got some things I need you to do against the enemy. Why do you think Saul wanted David to be commander of an army and lead the army? Because he was hoping that David would be killed by the Philistines in combat, and the Philistines could do his dirty work. And he says that if you read the verses. I'm not making that up. That's what he said. Let the Philistines dispose of the problem. But David lives through that. 1 Samuel 19, verses 9 and 10. Saul once again grabs a spear and he throws it at David to take his life. Once again, David is spared by God. Saul misses again. Verses 11 through 17 of 1 Samuel 19. Saul tries to kill David in his sleep. David had married one of King Saul's daughters. And King Saul wanted to go through his daughter to find out when David went to bed. And then Saul would slip in with his men and kill David while he slept. Thankfully, David wasn't in the bed when Saul came. Once again, God had led him away. Then in verses 18 through 24 of 1 Samuel 19, Saul once again tries to kill David in Ramah. But God steps in, changes Saul's mind and heart through some various things that he does. And David escapes alive. You see, this envious anger that King Saul has turned him into a man whose mission in life is not to glorify God, not to rule the nation that God has given him, not to rule the people that God has given him, not to do good, not to make the world he lives in better. Saul's whole mission in life is to kill David. He's consumed with it. And every time he fails, the intensity of the hatred and hostility, the envious anger, only increases. As we read the story, King Saul becomes darker and darker and darker. More depraved, more depraved, more depraved. More depressed, more depressed, more depressed. More demonized, more demonized, more demonized. And then he commits self-destruction. Saul became a madman. He would die consumed with envious anger that would torment him 24/7 every day of his life until he died. Some would say, pity David. No, I say pity Saul. Because he allowed envious anger to destroy him. That's briefly the story. You say, I like that story, Pastor. You going to let us go now? No. Because remember, there's a rest of the story, and that's you. That's me. Do we have envious anger? I'm not asking you to raise your hand. I'm just asking you to think about it. Do we have within us an anger towards someone that causes us to cast suspicion upon them? We question their motives of what they do. Even when they do something good to us, we question their motive. Do we have a hatred toward them? Do we have a hostility toward them? Would we kill them if we could? Physically kill them? Reputationally kill them? Do we have that? I want you to notice in 1 Samuel 18, verse 8, that King Saul had it again. 1 Samuel 18, verse 8. Then Saul was very what? Angry. Where'd that anger come from? It came from envy. And the sayings of what they sang displeased him. He didn't like the top 40 hit. And he said, they have ascribed to David tens thousands, and to me they have only ascribed thousands. What more does he want, this upstart, than my very kingdom? From that day forward, Saul's attitude, his verbiage, his actions toward David changed. Saul wanted to kill him. Envious anger. You know, it's kind of like pride. People will confess a lot of things. Pastor, I want to confess that I have an alcohol problem. Pastor, I want to confess that I have a pornography problem. Pastor, I want to confess that I have a drug problem. Pastor, I want to confess that I have a lying, cheating, stealing problem. We as a staff, as your pastor, we get those confessions. People don't seem to mind admitting that's where their faults are and ask us to help them, and while they ask God to forgive them. But I can't think of any time in my 37 years of being a pastor, I can't think of one time. Now, maybe the staff can, but I can't think of one time somebody's come into my office and said, Pastor, I've got a pride problem. Pride, by its very nature, camouflages itself that we who have it can't see that we have it. And envy is the same thing. I've never had anybody in 37 years come into my office and say, Pastor, I want you to know I'm battling with envy. I have a hatred and hostility toward this person because I believe they're doing me wrong. Never have had that. Because envy, like pride, those who have it are the last ones to know it. And even if they have it, they deny it, they excuse it, or they try to cover it up. Now remember, this isn't just about King Saul. It's about you and I. I'd like to give you a little test if I can. I've already taken the test. I'm not going to tell you how I did. Don't you be smiling. You're not going to tell me how you did either. But I want you to answer these questions, and I want you to be honest. You don't have to write down your answers. You don't have to whisper to your neighbor. You don't have to try to peek over somebody's shoulder to see what they put. Just some questions. Question number 1. Do you secretly regret the success of other people? If you're in the choir, does it bother you when other people in the choir are successful? If you're an officer in this church, does it bother you when other officers in this church are successful? If you're a Sunday school teacher, does it bother you when other Sunday school classes are growing and they're successful and maybe yours isn't? Do you secretly regret the success of other people that are doing the same thing you're doing, but they seem to be more successful at it, more awarded at it, more blessed at it? Secondly, do you believe you could do better than others if you got the same chance they got or was given the same break that they got? Do you believe the problem that you're dealing with in regard to other people and their success is the fact that they get a chance where you didn't get that chance? They get a break where you didn't get that break. They knew somebody that you don't know. They have an insider track that you don't have. Do you believe that your success is only because, your lack of success is only because of their success? And their success is not because of anything they've done. It's just that they were given a chance. They were given a break that you never got. And it angers you. Thirdly, do you believe others' success comes at your expense? Saul did. He believed that David was famous only because he took from King Saul. King Saul could have fought Goliath, but he didn't want to do it. But he blames David now for taking from him to be successful. Do you believe others' success comes at your expense? Do you believe you are the reason why they made it, not themselves? They wouldn't be singing specials if they didn't know Keith. That's the only reason they're up there singing specials. I can sing just as good as them, but he gives them a break and don't give it to me. And I can teach just as good as any teacher in this church, but I don't get the chance to teach because I don't know Pastor Sam, or I don't know Jason. And I could lead this women's group, but they don't let me lead it. They hold me back. Is that you? Do you believe that others make it because of who they know, not so much what they do? Do you believe they make it at your expense? That could be you, but you don't get the breaks. You don't get the chance. Does it bother you when others are recognized and you're not? Pastor Jim recognizes a lot of people. He don't ever recognize me. Does that make you mad? Does it anger you? Does it make you happy when somebody else fails? Do you grin on the inside when you have a competitor, or at least somebody you call a competitor, and they fail? Does it make you feel good? Sixthly, does it make you angry when someone else is complimented or awarded and not you? Does it make you angry when somebody gets 2 handshakes and you get none? Or only one? Does other people's success make us angry? Are you better at criticism than praise? Are you? Are you better at criticizing and being negative than you are at being praiseful and positive? Does tearing someone down bring you joy? Lord, if you're not going to make me skinny or make everybody else fatter. Is that you? Does tearing somebody down bring you joy? Do you often believe you're treated unfairly, never respected? Is that the way you think? Is that the way you feel? Do you hold on to every slight, every infraction, every wrong ever done? Do you believe everybody's out to get you? If you answered yes to any of those 10 simple questions, you have an envy problem. It might be small right now, but you feed envy and it will get what? It will get bigger. And pretty soon, what you controlled when it was small will control you when it's large. If you have an envy problem, you have a Mr. Hyde living inside your Dr. Jekyll. And that ugly side of you will be seen more and more as you allow that envy to turn into anger, to turn into hatred, to turn into hostility, to turn into desiring that person to be eliminated, murdered, if you will. King Saul didn't start out wanting to hurt David, but his envious anger led him to wanting to kill David. Not once, 5 times he tried. Second thing, if you have envy, if you have anger, envious anger, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? Let me give you some principles of dealing with envious anger. And actually, this would work for any sin. The first thing is, if you want to overcome it. Now, if you don't want to overcome it, you can let it consume you and destroy you. And it will. You say, Pastor, I've had it for weeks. It ain't bothered me yet. Your day will come, I promise you. Man takes sin, then sin will take man. You listening to me? It's always been that way. It always will be that way. That's why you have to be like Barney Fife. You have to nip it in the bud. Get it while it's small, because once it gets large, it's difficult to contain. A little tiger cub is easy to control. A full-grown tiger, not so much. But how do you overcome envious anger? You've taken the test, and if you identify yourself as a possibility of having it, how do you deal with it? First of all, you've got to admit you have it. Because remember, envy's like pride. Nobody has it. Never had anybody say, Pastor, my problem's pride. I'm narcissistic. Pastor, my problem's envy. Jealousy. A raging envy. A raging jealousy. Never had it. But if you have it, you need to admit it. You need to be honest with yourself. I have this sin in my life. I have this Mr. Hyde living in me. Most of the time, I'm Dr. Jekyll. I can suppress it. But there comes times when it just boils over. And I become Mr. Hyde. I become ugly. I become brutal. I become mean. I become nasty. You got to admit you have it. Inside of you, it lives. Admit it. If you don't admit it, the other things don't matter. You have to admit it. Secondly, you have to confess it to the Lord. Admission to the Lord, I have this problem. I have this sin, confession follows it. If we confess our sin, He is faithful and just to forgive us of our sin, to cleanse us of all iniquity. If we confess our sin. What does confess mean? It means to admit I've got the problem. And I'm saying this and I'm doing this. I accept full responsibility. I don't blame anybody else. I don't excuse myself. I don't defend myself. I don't debate myself. I don't add on excuses. Lord, I admit I have the problem with envy. I admit that it becomes anger envy sometimes. I admit that I have the problem. I do it because I want to do it. Nobody forces me to do it. Nobody makes me do it. Nobody twists my arm to do it. The devil didn't make me do it. The world doesn't make me do it. I do it because I want to do it. I admit it. I confess it. My sin is against you, O God, as well as other people that I have this problem against. Confession detoxes the soul because sin in the soul is poison. Confession is a detoxer. It takes the contaminants and the toxins out of your soul that the sin causes. You say, Pastor, I got another way of doing it. What is your way of doing it? Jack Daniels, Jim Beam. That's a good way to do it. How about some powder or some juice or a pill or a cigarette? That's what some people think, does it? What about a program? Let me just go get a program, get some counseling, get some therapy. None of that works until you admit you got the sin and confess it and let God forgive you of it. You say, Pastor, I've done it 10,000 times. He will forgive you 10,000 times. I like to say He's the God of 10,000 second chances. He always is willing to give you a fresh start, a new beginning, if you come to Him and ask for it. So we're talking about how are we going to deal with envious anger. King Saul didn't deal with it. But how are we going to deal with it? Because if we don't deal with it, we're going to end up in the same place at the end of our life that he was at, and we might end up in the same place in eternity he's at. We admit it. We confess it. Then thirdly, we pray for those that we have that we're against. That person that you perceive as your rival, your competitor. That person you perceive to be that threat to you being what you want to become. Having what you want to have, doing what you want to do. You pray for them. You pray for them. But Pastor, I don't want to pray for them. Pastor, can I be truthful with you? I don't want to pray for them. You can be truthful with me. Be truthful with God. Tell God you don't want to pray for them. You say, I'm not going to say that to God. If you're thinking it, He already knows it. If you're feeling it, He already knows it. He knows everything about us. Why do we think it's a surprise when we get... I'm not going to tell Him. He won't know. He does know. God loves us to be honest with Him. He's a God of relationship. You can't have a relationship unless you have honesty. And God wants us to be honest. Lord, I admit I have a problem with anger and envy. I confess my sin to you and ask you to forgive me and cleanse me and make me whole. I ask for a new beginning. And Lord, I'm praying for this person. I don't want to pray for them, quite frankly, but I'm going to pray for them because you command me to pray for people. And I'm going to pray for them. Lord, you know I don't want to pray for them, but that's okay. I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to be obedient to you and trust that as I'm obedient to you, you allow my thoughts and feelings to catch up, and then my prayer for that person might be more effective. You say, but Pastor, they're an arrogant jerk. Pray for them. They're an argumentative know-it-all. Pray for them. They're an awful braggart. Pray for them. God can change them. We can put up with them. God puts up with us, doesn't He? Pray for those you envy, you have anger against. Anger, envy. Admit, confess, pray. And then lastly, invest in someone else's life. If all you ever do is go to the mirror and look at yourself all the time, your life will never count for a whole lot. In fact, you'll carry around anger and envy in you. The most successful people I know are people who do not look into a mirror and keep their eyes on their self all the time and complain about how they're mistreated or how they don't get this or how they don't get that. Woe is me, pity is me. Most successful people are people who look through a glass and they see other people. And they say, I'm going to invest my life in those other people. I'm going to coach them up. I'm going to cheer them on. I'm going to clap for them when they're successful. I'm going to congratulate them. I'm going to deal with my sin by turning my wickedness into righteousness and investing it in somebody else. It's healthy to get yourself out from in front of the mirror and look out a glass. To get your eyes off yourself and get your eyes on people that you can make a big difference in if you just would. As I close, David's greatest victory was not against the giant Goliath. I submit to you, Goliath wasn't hard for David to kill because God killed him for David. But you know what David's greatest battle was? The greatest victory in battle he ever had? It was against a monster called envy that lived inside of King Saul, and King Saul directed all of his hatred and hostility toward David. And then David had to work hard not to direct it at somebody else. As you study the life of David, he never tried to hurt Saul. He never said anything unkind about Saul. He never did anything unkind to Saul. Saul had every intent to murder David. But David never retaliated. He never sought vengeance. He never sought payback. He never sought to get even. David just was David. He honored King Saul. Can you imagine that? He honored the man that was trying to kill him. He humbled himself before the people, who everywhere he went, they applauded him. They patted him on the back. They hugged him. He never let it go to his head. He never tried to be more than he was. And he understood that whoever he was, whatever he had, whatever he did, came from God. Give God the glory. David always tried to glorify God. Did he succeed all the time? No, but that's what his intent was. When David killed Goliath, he didn't walk around and say, I'm David, GGK, great giant killer. Glad to know you. No, you can't have my autograph. I'm too busy for you little people. I got to go on the Oprah Winfrey show. I got to go on this. I got to go on that. I got to give an interview here. I got to give an interview there. I'm sorry, I don't have time for you. Post and Courier's waiting on me. David never let his success go to his head. He honored King Saul for his position. If even it couldn't honor the person, he honored the position. And he was humble to the people, though they applauded him. He went from a zero to a hero, and he handled it well. He glorified God in everything he did. He sought to help others. As we're going to see next week, he developed a friendship with Saul's very son, Jonathan. You talk about a soap opera, we're going to get into one. And he built his resume in those early years for God's Hall of Fame. Nobody just shows up and is in God's Hall of Fame. You know how they get there? One step at a time, as they apply the principles of faith and obedience, trust and obedience. And they build up a resume that makes it worthy of them to be one day in God's Hall of Fame. David killed two giants, Goliath and a green-eyed monster called envy. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed.